Hello everyone, Prime here, and I hope you had a great day. Now today we're going to be covering a topic that could be touchy, not sure, but that will be, when is a Pantheon actually completed? There are 4 Pantheons who haven't really gotten a new update, and that being like a new addition to their Pantheon, i.e. a new god, fair amount of time. The Hindu Pantheon saw Ganesha in 2017, so last year, April. And since then, Ganesha himself has gotten 3 skins since his launch, and he's the most recent god here that we're going to talk about. He is also the only god here out of these 4 that we're going to talk about that actually appeared in the story. The others may have received a subtle mention that I just missed for some reason, but Ganesha has actually seen screen time. Though the caveat to that screen time is that if he was removed from the story, it would make no difference. The events would still play out as they did, because Ares and Izanami went to that specific temple where Ganesha was. Izanami burned down the temple, and we don't see Ganesha anymore. We don't even know if he dies. We don't know what happens to Ganesha. It's not really mentioned again, so far as we know. It might come up in the new story that's coming up. The story could have been written out to a place where Anubis has nowhere left to run, and he has a sort of standoff with Ares, but Ares ultimately wins. Anubis still goes to the underworld. Ares still claims his target, completes his mission, but this time Ganesha, we don't know whether he's alive or dead or not, there's no ambiguity there. Of course, Ganesha being dead means that there's a chance he could be united with everyone else is dead, Zeus and co, essentially, and help them escape the underworld, because Ganesha is a fairly... It's not unfair, it's even an injustice for me to say that he's a fairly intelligent... He's practically an enlightened being, right? If there's anyone that could help them escape the underworld, it's probably Ganesha. That's probably the reason. If I had to come up with any reason as to why Ganesha was included in the story, it's so that he can play that sort of important role later. Because when you think about it, Mercury was also equated with Thoth, so he could also help and figure out a way to get out of the underworld. But Ganesha, very valuable ally to have in that sort of situation as well. And of course Anubis would be a valuable ally to have in that scenario as well, because he's a god of death, probably knows a lot about how these sorts of systems work. I'm sure all of the gods have a basic understanding, but of course Anubis would definitely not just have that understanding, but also a more intensive understanding of how these systems work as well. So not only including the Hindu Pantheon in the story, but you're also allowing it to have a fairly important role, perhaps. Not that I can say with absolute certainty that Zeus will reappear in the story again, but I don't know, I feel like there's a fair chance that he will. And no one else in the universe seems to care much. I don't know how people, like the actual fans of Smite, how you guys feel about Ganesha, whether he's dead or not, what's up with his situation, or if you actually care. But yeah, we got Thoth in 2016, in November. He's seen 3 skins since his launch. In October, Camazotz 2016, 5 skins since his launch. And we've seen the oldest god here, Norse mythology, Fafnir, 3 skins since launch. Now, I'm mentioning how many skins they've gotten since launch because, and just to clarify, when I say launch, I mean launch of the character, not the launch of the game. Originally, I was going to talk about when a Pantheon becomes forgotten, but by the end of everything I was compiling to talk about in the video, I realized that really none of the Pantheons, you can't really say that any of them have really been forgotten. Every single god in the game is constantly getting new content added to them, or they're constantly getting balance changes. The meta is constantly shifting, and it will eventually, most likely, cover a lot of the gods, or most of the gods, to so much of a degree that an individual god can be forgotten and become irrelevant and completely, perhaps, unplayable in the eyes of most players, but Pantheons, whole pantheons of gods, I don't think have yet become irrelevant. In the story, that's a different case though, because really the Hindu Pantheon really didn't do that much of anything, and the Celtic Pantheon also hasn't seemingly done that much of anything in the story, but the Celtic Pantheon is a fairly recent new Pantheon, and it's not really established a nice setup or structure. What I mean for that is, with the current gods in the game, if it was to try and establish a healthy society where it kept all of its worshippers happier with all of the things that the god could provide, it wouldn't go so well. You've got Cuchulainn, who's sort of a hero god, which could help as far as, trying to keep everyone in line through showing an example of what the people should try and aspire to be. You've got a goddess of death, but unlike a goddess of death like Hel, who's contributing to maintaining the order of things, the Morrigan seems a lot more independent and sort of, you know, she'll do whatever she wants sort of thing, which isn't the most motivating thing in the world. I mean, sure, within doing that, within performing that function, she can still help to keep the society running because she can force a sort of way of living and helping people within the society to meet certain expectations. For instance, within the Celtic underworld or the Celtic otherworld, you know, as I mentioned in a really recent video, there's a cauldron inside of that underworld, and it doesn't operate properly for people who are cowards. And, you know, so there's a bit of a motivating factor there to sort of conform to a certain way of living. You have Artio, a god of nature, can help to sustain the people in terms of making sure that they've got enough to eat, that sort of thing. There's Kononos, in a similar vein to Artio. He's providing people with a way to hunt and gather food and things like that, among other things. You know, these gods do have multiple purposes. For example, Kononos is also associated with fertility. But the point is, in comparison to another Pantheon, like what I consider to be the strongest Pantheon in the game right now in terms of not just sheer numbers, but ability to be successful in the areas that, well, make these Pantheons of gods successful in comparison to the other gods. Greek mythology, the Greek Pantheon, because it's not just its own Pantheon, it's confirmed within the lore to also have the connection of the Roman Pantheon. So together, I believe that's 27 gods in total? In Smite, that are in Smite. Of course, you know, the actual Pantheon, the real-world Pantheon, has many more gods than that. You've got a goddess of love, which of course is necessary for, I think, fairly obvious reasons. 2 choices of gods of war. A god of death, very nice places that you can end up in, but also areas within the underworld that act as deterrents for, you know, not doing what would be considered the wrong thing or immoral things or things that you just want to avoid doing within society. You can have a lot more worshippers, or you have the position or opportunity to have a lot more worshippers than a lot of the other pantheons. And this is important because worshippers are one of the key ways that the gods gain sort of their strength and maintain their relevance within the world. More worshippers is good for the gods, especially a god like Zeus, for instance, would really value this system. But Hades is, of course, proven to really enjoy the amount of worshippers that he can enjoy. Zeus, not so long after that, also proves that that's fairly important to him as well. I'm sure Poseidon, for similar reasons, wouldn't want to be forgotten, and so on and so forth, and pretty much all the gods in the game, bar those that don't actually have to rely on worshippers to maintain their power. Now, of course, these gods that do rely on worship to sustain their powers would either want the humans to be submissive and as obedient as possible so that they keep worshipping the gods, and of course the submissive and obedient as possible so that they keep worshipping these gods and fueling their power, which for the humans then results back in, you know, a more healthier and just happier life, or more benefits within their life at the very least. And if you've got more gods to help your pantheon draw in more active worshippers, well, that's just better for you. But taking this from another perspective, there's also the sort of maps and the game modes. Not every map that's ever been created for the game for the players to play in is necessarily based off of different mythologies, but a lot of them are, including the adventures. You know, the Conquest map, that's Greek or Roman. Siege, clearly Mayan. Clash, clearly Egyptian. Joust, Chinese. Assault, Norse. But Hindu doesn't have its own map. And it might have gotten an adventure. I might have looked over that. Perhaps it might have. Perhaps not, but perhaps. But even if it did, you can't play that now, in the game right now. But just because your pantheon doesn't have a space within the game that they can clearly identify with or that they necessarily control, doesn't necessarily mean that their pantheon is incomplete. Well, why are the gods fighting in the first place? Well, in the video I made talking about or tackling this question, I essentially chalk it down to it being a matter of the gods wanting worshippers. And one of the reasons for that is that worshippers are directly linked to the power source of the gods. It's not the only reason why worshippers are important, but it's a fairly important reason. And so if you could somehow get more worshippers, then you have a better chance of just not being obsolete and maintaining your power at the same time. Where can you find other worshippers? Well, other areas of the world that other gods occupy. And it's not like they're just going to give it to you for freezies, going to have to try and take it by force or otherwise persuade them to give it to you. Now this brings us back to the Greeks. They have the best chance of maintaining their own worshippers, but also gaining other worshippers. And what is one of the reasons these gods are fighting each other? For worshippers. Why? Well, as I said in a previous video, whenever you pick a god, you're choosing to funnel a certain amount of worshippers into that god. Whether they win the game that you're playing or lose, they still get worshippers at the end of the match. And sort of to keep these people happy, whether the other gods exist, because the Smite story has proven that other gods can still exist just because they haven't been mentioned within the story. They can still be fulfilling certain roles, regardless of if we actually see them being mentioned in the story or if we hear about. But at the same time, we don't necessarily know that they are still performing these functions. And if gods can dwell in the underworld for any amount of time, who knows what gods within the Smite story are also just in the underworld as prisoners or just chilling there and are dead. It's a possibility that other gods that haven't even been released into the game yet, or may never be released into the game, are just simply in the underworld, unable to do anything, unable to join the conflict. And if that's the case, of course, the god that is attached to that pantheon is of course weakened because they lose an area of the world or an element of the world that they can't really take advantage of the worshippers or receive worshippers from that area of the world in quite the same way that they were whilst that god was in control. In other words, another god can take advantage of that and take the worshippers and strengthen their own pantheon, or more specifically strengthen their own personal position within the world of Smite. I suppose we'll have to see. But I suppose really it depends on what your definition of complete really is. If there are key gods from the Pantheon that perform key roles that are necessary, then I suppose the Greek Pantheon really isn't complete yet. But those are just my thoughts, and I suppose with a topic like this, it really will depend on what exactly you want to see in the game, or what you want out of the game. So let me know if you think that any of the Pantheons in Smite right now are complete, and if not, tell me what you think needs to be done to the Pantheons, or what needs to be added to the game for those Pantheons to be completed. And if you enjoyed, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new and want to see more content like this, and till the next video, have a very good day. I, the Emperor, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.